I had never seen New Mexico before. I had been on the van about 3 days, and we were finally arriving in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to drop off one of the inmates at one of the jails there. The city was just full of bright lights, and I just stared as we were moving past through the city. The billboards and the lights kept me a little more present than I had been used to. I saw a billboard. It was interesting, and it read, "Hawaii's waiting for you." And I just remember thinking, I sure the hell wish that's where I was going. I knew that someday after all this was settled, that I would visit and take that mild weather and the beautiful healing waters and just rest with, with my soul. We were headed across after we dropped off this inmate, and he was the one that had been caught taking the trail mix from the convenience store. So after we dropped him off, we were headed toward Texas on Interstate 40. This transport company was out of West Memphis, Arkansas, and that was supposed to be our next stop. We were traveling through Texas when both of these drivers got a call from their supervisor telling them to stop at a rest stop and wait for their next assignment. I could hear some of the conversation, and some of it was about me. And apparently someone from Georgia had called wanting to know why it was taking them so long to get me back. Well, that pissed them off. And they just started yelling in the front, "She's a fake ass bitch." And I heard him. I saw him look back. He cut his eyes so sharp at me that it ripped my spirit into fear. He said, "We're going to be taking you on a long haul to Georgia." I felt the familiar symptoms of that survival mode consume my body. My heart raced, and I fought back the thoughts of trying to escape out of those 4 cuffs that were scraping my wrists and ankles. What are the plans for these men? What were they going to do to me? How are they going to hurt me? And if I got along with them, were they going to try to rape me or beat me? We pulled in to the rest stop, and they let us get out, and it was warm and it was sunny, and I just found a picnic table and I sit down, and it's so embarrassing and it's awkward because you have families and couples, and they're pulling in this rest stop, and they're getting out, and they're just seeing a van with a bunch of inmates cuffed at the wrists and ankles, just walking around or sitting. And so it's so humiliating. And we stayed there for several hours, still in cuffs, and I just dragged my feet across the pavement and over to the women's restroom. And while I was sitting at that picnic table, I just talked to the sun about warming my face and lifting all those suppressed emotions that I had bottled up. And then the memory came up about when I was in Arizona a few months prior. I had found a van company that made these custom build vans that you could travel and live out of. And I put down a $5,000 deposit. He was going to make it right. It was going to fit me perfectly. It was going to have a shower and a bed, and it was going to have a table to pull out of the back so I could do my healing work and just everything to cover your basic needs. And there I was, sitting at that table looking at that transport van, and it was the same type of van that they use to convert. And that owner of the van company had promised to have it done by March, and then I could fly into Phoenix. I would pick it up, and then I would drive it to Sedona, Arizona, where I would meet with a shaman for some training. And I was sure at that point that I never wanted to dream about living my life out of a van again. I had saw enough of the country out of a van, and I was done. And I got kind of through with those thoughts, and I heard, y'all get ready and load up on the van. We're leaving out of here, and we're headed to Nashville, Tennessee. We still have some more inmates we've got to pick up. And I said, well, where will I sit? And then one of the inmates said, well, she can sit on my face. Once I was in the van, I began to cry. Something I'd not really been able to do since I left California, 3 days prior. And the sergeant, he turned around, he looked at me, and he said, you better dry that shit up right now. He said, don't nobody care about that wasted tear. And my heart just began to race. It was constantly racing. And I was constantly trying to slow my heart rate down, calm down, get myself grounded and somewhat stabilized. We took the ramp onto the interstate, and we started traveling toward Tennessee. And I saw a truck that looked just like my dad's that passed by. And I just leaned my head up against the window, and I was like, Dad, please come quick, show up and rescue me from these heartless assholes. That dirty gangster rap continued. It was just turned back up in our ears. I hated it. I hated that I was forced to listen to men performing music about forcing women to have sex for hours at a time. There was no way this kind of treatment and behavior was supposed to be allowed in our country. We passed through Oklahoma City, staying on Interstate 40 toward Little Rock, Arkansas. I watched out the van window as a few cars on the interstate passed by us. And I wanted to be in one of those cars. I wanted my freedom back. I wanted some food. And every time we stopped for a restroom break, I'd hold my head up just enough to look at the chips and the snacks on the shelves. It was hard to hide the shame as I felt regular customers walk through the store paying for gas and food and staring at us. So anyway, I could hear some of the conversations up front again in the van, and some and from what I pieced together, we were going to meet another van in a parking lot in Nashville, Tennessee, and to trade out some of the inmates. And we arrived at this convenience store late on March 20th. It was late at night, and the door opened, and we were all motioned to get out, which was a blessing because I really thought I was going to be alone with those two men all the way to Georgia from Tennessee. And when the other van pulled in beside us, it was a really old Chevrolet van. I mean old, we're talking 90s model. And there were several inmates inside. Two white men stepped out, and I could tell one was in charge of all the transports that were happening. Like he was the main supervisor. The back door opened, and I watched a pregnant woman crawl out from the back and towards the van that I had just gotten off of. And then I hear Weeks, you'll be riding in the back. All the inmates looked scattered. I couldn't tell who was who anymore. In this parking lot, they're switching us from this van to that van, but really, honestly, I was just relieved that I wasn't have to stay on the van that I was on. So when I walked over to that old van that the pregnant woman got out of the back of, there was a young woman sitting in that back seat, and the back seat faced the road, like faced the back window. And that's where I was going to be placed, in the back with her. And it wasn't a full-length seat. It had kind of gotten shorter back behind the wheel well. And she had like shoulder length brown hair, a Kentucky t-shirt, and no shoes. I mean, she was barefoot and she was high strung. The transporters put me in that seat with her, and it was so nasty. I mean, I thought that other van was kind of gross, but it was a new van. Like, it wasn't even a year old. It was a rental van because their old van had broke down and they had to rent this van. So it was a new Ford. I mean, this was probably, the seats were originally gray and they were so stained and just, I didn't know if it was a drink, piss. I mean, I really didn't know what I was sitting in. And I'm trying to take all this in. And then you've just got these inmates and they're just bouncing around the back. And this van was different. You couldn't see the drivers from the back seat of that van. I mean, there was like this wall up. And so you couldn't really hear or see them. And it wasn't open like that van I had just got out of. So I look at, I'm getting in and I hear, what'd you do? And I said, I don't want to talk about it. I mean, we were still sitting in the parking lot. And she looked at me as if it was a big deal for me to keep my mouth shut about my charges. And then she said, well, she don't want to talk about it. Oh, well. She said, I'm in here for meth. She said, I had a warrant and me and my girlfriend wanted to get away from Kentucky and all the meth. And she said, we drove down to Florida. And on the way back, we were stopped. She said, I had an outstanding warrant and they took me in. And she said, I just miss my girl so much. So, I mean, like I said, we were still in the parking lot and she stepped outside of the van and got us cigarettes from one of the drivers. And there was just a circle of inmates standing out there. And these guys were sharing a pack of cigarettes with the inmates. And I said, no, I said, I don't smoke. And I said, are we headed to Georgia now? And this man was like, well, heck no. He said, we just finished 3 days picking up and dropping off in Georgia. He said, we're headed to Pennsylvania. We're dropping off and picking up from Tennessee and all the way up to Pennsylvania, and then we'll go back to Georgia. So, of course, in my mind, I'm like, what in the fuck is going on here? I was less than 4 hours away from home, and now this shit? I sure can't have faith or hope now. And I was going to just have to make peace and be friends with this woman next to me. All of us inmates piled into that old, nasty white van, and we began our journey up north in the freezing cold. And she looks at me. She said, my name's Melissa. She, what's your name? I said, well, I'm Brett. She said, well, it looks like we won't be going anywhere towards Kentucky, where I want to be dropped off. And I said, well, I'm pissed. I said, I was 4 hours from home, and now look. I cried, and I was so tired. And we both were. She was a talker. But there was not enough room on that seat for the both of us to lay down and take a nap. We tried to lean on each other, and that didn't work. And she was really, really skinny. And she said, here's what I'm going to do. She said, I'm going to lay down in that floor, in the feet area between the door and the bottom of the seat. She said, so you can spread out a little. And I said, are you sure? She said, yeah, I'll be fine. She said, we need some sleep. So I took off my pair of black On Clouds shoes, and I used one as a pillow, and then she took the other one to use as a pillow because she didn't have any shoes. And I mean, just sitting here talking about it, I want to gag. I mean, I really want to throw up. I mean, this sounds like, to me, when I'm rereading this, because I've forgotten so much of it, like an animal shelter. Like it's filth. And so I guess we dozed off. And the next thing I remember is we're stopped, making another stop to use the restroom. and the passenger in the van, one of the officers, he opened up the back door to let us out. And he was tall, and he had this dark hair, and he had on all Under Armour clothing. And I don't know, for some reason, he reminded me of my brother.